Hey, good morning, everybody. It's AP Live, AP European History. My name is Todd Beach. The sun is shining again today in Minneapolis. My children have decided it's pajama day, which I'm not sure is really novel anymore for their virtual learning. But here we are. I teach at Eastview High School in Apple Valley, Minnesota. That's a suburb of Minneapolis and St. Paul. And this is Katie.
Hi, I'm Katie Lancey. I teach at Coral Gables Senior High, which is in a suburb of Miami, Florida. The sun is kind of shining here. Yeah, I don't think there's anything new or exciting about pajamas anymore
Not
these
at all.
days. But anyway, happy Friday. We're excited to be here and give you yet another practice DBQ to practice these skills that you're going to need for the AP exam in May. So let's go ahead and get started.
Great. Thank you, Katie. Yes, it's DBQ Friday. We're going to make that a thing. So it's a thing, DBQ Friday. So we will go for skill development. Katie will have some feedback from the practice yesterday, and then we will devote quite a bit of time this morning to unpacking your next DBQ, walking you through that, and giving you the practice. And our content today is the scientific revolution. So contextualizing the scientific revolution and the scientific revolution, all trying to do that in just a few minutes. That's going to be something, but that's what we're going to attempt to do today. And these are the lesson objectives and the thinking skills and the reasoning development that we're working on. And you're welcome to pause the video if you want to read through those at this time. But let's go ahead and get into our warm-up with Katie.
All right, so yesterday I gave you a document from a former DBQ, and I was really impressed at the number of responses that really picked up more than anything in these responses. I'll give you one other example, but response after response after response that really looked at point of view in this document for that Claude's position as an intendant, having understood what that means and where his loyalty lies. So I'm going to show you a couple examples that did everything that I asked, that you went through. You gave us the actual attribution, and then you followed it up with a nice explanation. So this first one is from Angela at John W. Norton High School in California. And again, we're reminding you, you can handwrite these exams, so people are still practicing this. So Angela wrote, in the intendant's report to the French finance minister, Jean-Baptiste Colbert, Claude requests Colbert to advocate for the construction of a Dijon hospital against the parliament, who seems to only be concerned about maintaining royal power by being the only ones allowed to initiate orders. The author's point of view as an intendant. So I really like that Angela used the words from the rubric, point of view, suggests that he is supposed to be a loyal reporter to the king and help centralize royal control. This is important because it proves that the monarch prioritizes to maintain his power rather than the desperate needs of his empire. It demonstrates that even those closest to the king are beginning to notice how absolutism blinds them to think that they are only qualified to give orders, when in reality, they don't do service to the citizens. So that was a nice job of starting with the attribution and then giving the example of point of view and talking about that position and then explaining it. So really nice job. And here's one from Devin at La Jolla High School in California. And Devin talks about the purpose of the document. Again, in a report to French finance minister Jean-Baptiste Colbert in 1669, an intendant by the name of Claude Beauchou informed him that the Parliament of Burgundy refused to approve the construction of a general hospital. Beauchou's purpose in doing so was to emphasize to Colbert that this simple action of disobedience indicated that France continued to have a lack of centralization. The author went on to indicate that the Parliament of Burgundy would only budge if Colbert inserted his special protection, and that these actions were unacceptable because France was an absolute monarchy under King Louis XIV. This is important because it shows France as a whole was not politically united under a monarch, given that local governments seem to be ignoring the royal council and doing as they please. Thus, this exemplifies the weakness of Louis XIV as well as the state, and this point was extremely stressed by Beauchou in this report to Colbert. So amazing example of using purpose of the document for sourcing. And then the last one is shorter, but I thought it did a really nice job. This is Amish in Pine Richland High School in Pennsylvania. French intendant Claude Beauchou, in a report to finance minister Jean-Baptiste Colbert, explains that the Parliament of Burgundy is trying to exhibit its sovereignty by rejecting the establishment of a general hospital in the region. Boshu is writing from his point of view as an intendant, which means he is responsible for executing the king's policies. This is important because it shows the king's desires were often met with backlash from local courts. So Louis XIV did not have absolute authority over local establishments. So really nice job of explaining the point of view and why this is important to the argument that this person would have been making with this document about Louis's power. So this is really, really well done.
Really like those. Just comment too on that, Katie, is we're starting to see that real nice pattern, I guess, if for lack of a better word, in the sourcing. We're seeing attribution, a description of what's going on in the document, then the sourcing of the document, then the why this is important. This is important because, and then ending that work with that nice parenthetical. So thank you, students. If you're doing that, you're learning a really good skill. It's going to really help you, and you're going to get to practice again today on the DBQ. We'll get into our content now, contextualizing the scientific revolution. So what brought us into this period? We'll start with the A paragraph, scientific thought in the early 1500s based on the ancient or medieval ideas. The term science wasn't even used until beginning of the 19th century. I'm going to slide over to the source. I was looking for a good source or image with Aristotle, and everything you find is a bust of Aristotle. So I thought that's really not that interesting to me. And then I came across this. This is an image that appears in this collection of Aristotle's works. And sometimes when they do these in these really nice old books, they would have artists do these really cool images. And I thought that one's really kind of cool. I really like how it sticks out and gives us that idea, a picture of Aristotle, and we see this starry sky and him contemplating this, I don't know what amoeba looking thing, but I like it. I just thought it was different than the typical bust of Aristotle. So here we go, back to B. One of the most important disciplines was natural philosophy. It focused on fundamental questions about nature, universe, its purpose, how it functioned. How did we get here? How does this work? Why do we have day and night and these things, the cyclical aspects of things? That's the study of natural philosophy, and to try and understand how it works. So the European notions about the universe as we head into the 1500s are based on Aristotle's ideas, the Aristotelian principles. And then what happened, and this is really important to kind of remember, medieval theologians such as Thomas Aquinas will bring Aristotle's philosophy. Let's understand that Aristotle was not a Christian, it's pre-Christian. And so Aquinas is going to bring the ideas of the ancient Aristotle into harmony with Christian doctrine. And so Aquinas does this writing, and in that writing, the chief feature of the writing is the view that a belief that the earth is at the center of the universe, that it's motionless, it's static, and everything goes around the earth, okay? That's kind of how Aquinas brings Aristotle's ideas from the ancient period and tries to force that, I guess, into Christian doctrine and Christian ideology. So that's where the thinking is, and that's important as we get into this today. The development of universities then is going to accord philosophy a place alongside law, medicine, theology. That's important because then it's seen as an equal study, something that's really important. And medieval universities will draw on rich traditions of Islamic learning. Lots of learning about, especially the universe and natural philosophy, is going to come from the East and come from the Middle East. And then the Renaissance is really kind of what stimulates this scientific progress, because we've become this curiosity, and it's because that's when we're studying the ancients. Next slide, please.
Okay, so that's great. And I think we'll take a minute here to talk about the word revolution. So Todd gave you the background as to how we set the standard for a geocentric universe. And now we're going to talk about the people who upend that geocentric theory. And we start with Copernicus. And so Copernicus is a Polish cleric, and he theorized that the stars and planets, including the Earth, revolve around a fixed sun. And this is going to be the heliocentric theory, or the Copernican hypothesis, that the sun, not the Earth, is the center of the universe. So by doing that, we are upending Aristotle and Ptolemy, and we are contradicting this view that's come into harmony that the church is putting forward. He publishes on the revolutions of heavenly spheres in the B paragraph in 1543. It's the year of his death, because he understood the implications of what he was saying. He's saying that the earth is not in the center, and also that heaven and earth are separate. And this idea that there are these crystal spheres being pushed around by angels moving the stars, he's contradicting that. And so in the C category, we're going to see, certainly because it's published in the year of his death, but also because the church didn't pay considerable attention at that moment. His work is going to be declared false at the beginning of the 17th century, but we will see that not much happens as far as Copernicus is concerned. And then building on the ideas of Copernicus, we're going to have first in A, we have the Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe, and he will actually get funds from the King of Denmark, where he's going to give him an island off the coast of Denmark. And that island is going to be used for an observatory where he will compile data every night. And that data, that mass amount of data is going to be very important. He actually believed that all the planets except the Earth revolved around the sun, but it would actually be his assistant that will make a lot of sense out of the data and will abandon Ptolemy's view of the world. And that is in B, that is Kepler. So Kepler, using that data, comes up with three really revolutionary ideas as far as planetary motion is concerned. He first comes up the idea of the elliptical orbit, the not circular orbit that has been put forth, but this rather ellipses as things are moving. He also realized that as things are moving, they're going in different speeds around the sun, and that the further away something was from the sun, the longer it took to make the journey in the orbit. And then in C, we'll talk about Galileo. Galileo also challenges Aristotle's ideas, particularly about motion on Earth. He will come up with the law of accelerating bodies, which is that 32 feet per second square that's there. He improves the telescope and he will use it to look up. And that is where he's going to get himself into some trouble. He writes a book, Starry Messenger, and it has depictions of the moon that have craters and the sun with sunspots. And so we're going to see that that contradicts the idea of a perfect heavenly body. And then later on, if you take a look at the image on the right, this is a painting that's in the Louvre, Galileo before the Holy Office. And this is Galileo before the Inquisition, because after he'd been told that he had to teach Copernicus as just a theory, but he later on publishes an actual endorsement of the heliocentric theory. And this will get him in trouble. He's tried by the Inquisition and he's initially put into prison, and then that's later commuted to a house arrest. And he remains in house arrest for the rest of his life. There's a bit of a myth or perhaps story that as he has forced to recant to the Inquisition, he mutters under his breath, "The earth still moves." So, don't know if that's true or not, but that image there is Galileo's trial before the Inquisition.
Thanks, Katie. We do that bit on Galileo. I always show students in my classroom, I have a newspaper article from Minneapolis Star Tribune from 1992. And the title of the article's headline, "That's when the church finally admitted that they were wrong about Galileo." So 1992. And what that tells us is that, my gosh, this authority, the church, is really slow to change or really slow to even recognize or acknowledge that it may have been wrong. So keep that in mind as we're talking about this today. This is why Copernicus is slow to, or it doesn't even want to publish while he's alive, because there's this, that authority is so real. Okay, so we're going to talk about Isaac Newton and the Newtonian synthesis, and we'll start with this image. Again, I was kind of looking for a different image of Newton that I'd seen probably in textbooks. And this one I thought kind of caught my eye. We've got the light shining through. He's doing an experiment of light, and he does some work with optics, which we'll talk a little bit about, but he's going to really make his mark in the law of universal gravitation. So he's born into the lower English gentry in the A paragraph, 1642, enrolled in Cambridge in 1661. And then in B, he unites the experimental and the theoretical mathematical sides of science. So he arrives at some of his most basic ideas about physics. I thought this is really relevant. Between 1664 and 1666, during a break from studies at Cambridge because there's an outbreak of the plague. So Because there's an outbreak of the plague and nobody can be at Cambridge, he's off on his own, and that's when he does some of this amazing work. It's during this period he discovers his law of universal gravitation, as well as the concepts of centripetal force, centripetal force and acceleration. So during this time of plague, he is making all these discoveries. He doesn't even publish it because he doesn't think it's that big a deal. Then he kind of goes back and he's doing some study of optics in 1684, and he returns to physics. And then 3 years later, he's going to publish his seminal work, Principia Mathematica, okay, where he takes the astronomy of Copernicus that's corrected by Kepler's laws, as Katie told you about, the physics of Galileo and his predecessors, and he makes this synthesis. He puts these forward into 3 laws of motions and mechanics, and the complexity of this work is going to take scientists and engineers 200 years to work out the implications. It's going to be those 20th century physicists that we talked about, gosh, a couple weeks ago, that are going to be the ones that really kind of work this out and move science on beyond that. Key feature of Newton's synthesis is the law of universal gravitation. Every body in the universe attracts every other body in precise mathematical relationship. This is how gravity and force works according to Newton. Thank you.
All right, and so the 2 people we're going to talk about as part of the lesson today are Bacon and Descartes. And so both of these individuals are attributed with articulating versions of the scientific method. Francis Bacon argues that new knowledge has to be pursued through empirical research, and this is going to be called the inductive reasoning or empiricism. He'll begin with observation and move through experimentation towards generalizations about things. He was very much a believer that science should be useful and that it should make people's lives longer and more comfortable. And followers of Bacon actually create the Royal Society, which still exists today, to discuss finding of scholars all over Europe. And they do that in 1660. And then our gentleman on the right, Rene Descartes, there's so much we can talk about with him. He's our deductive reasoning person. He has one that moves from general principles through steps of reason to more particular cases. And he talks about this in his discourse on method. And it's there where we have that famous quote from him, I think, therefore I am, where he talks about the idea that because he can think, he must exist. He's known for the idea of Cartesian dualism. And this is an idea that nature is made up of substances that take up space that we call matter, and intangible substances like the mind. We also, if you're a geometry fan, we have the Cartesian plane or the coordinate system, and that would be very useful at the time in architecture, engineering. They would use it for military applications as well. So both of these gentlemen are credited with articulating versions of the scientific method that most of you probably use in school.
Great, thank you, Katie. So medicine, the body, and chemistry. We'll start with our source on the right. This is Andreas Vesalius, Flemish thinker. And there are so many images of Vesalius, and some of them weren't appropriate for this forum because it's all anatomy, right? So it tells you he's got the flayed arm of the human body. And so Vesalius is the one who's going to take scientific thinking a little bit further. We'll start with the A paragraph. For many centuries, ancient Greek physician Galen, their explanation of the body carried the same authority as Aristotle's account of the universe. So we have the ancients telling us these things. We're rediscovering these works from the Renaissance. And then those works, these works of the ancients, are going to carry forward into this modern period. And some are not really questioning that. And so in A1, according to Galen, the body contained 4 humors. And illness is believed to be a result of an imbalance of the humors, which is why some doctors would frequently prescribe bloodletting to expel excess blood, and that will make you feel better. Now, we know today that that's just not true. Losing blood is not a good thing, but that was the thinking for a very long period of time, okay? We move to B. Paracelsus is an early proponent of experimental method in medicine. So let's science this thing. He's going to pioneer the use of chemicals and drugs rather than relying on bloodletting. And through that work, tries to discover what are some natural remedies that we have that we can prescribe that will help people feel better. C, we have Andreas Vesalius, dissecting human bodies and publishing on the structure of the human body. This work is so important because it's teaching others, right? These really intricate drawings of the anatomy of the human body help others to learn about how to solve problems with the human body. And then in D, William Harvey discovers the circulation of blood, so the circulatory system through veins and arteries, 1628. He's the first to explain how the heart worked like a pump. He's the first to explain the function of its muscles and the valves. And then in E, Robert Boyle will help found the modern science of chemistry, discover Boyle's law, which states that the pressure of gas varies inversely with volume. There's this really famous painting of they have pumping gas or pumping air out of the vacuum, if you will, and the bird is dying. And I thought it was too sad to put on the slide, but that's the painting that's associated often with Boyle.
That's the first one I thought of too when I saw that. So for today, we obviously continue to just reconnect with knowledge that you've already had before. This was a quick review of the main things in the scientific revolution. So you got the context for the scientific revolution, and you got an understanding of change during the scientific revolution. And you can read the developments and processes that are below if you want. Just pause the video, because now we're going to move on to your practice.
Great, thank you, Katie. All right, so let's take a look at the rubrics. And I know we went through scientific revolution. Oh my gosh, we did this scientific revolution in like 20 minutes. So know that this is review, right? This is not new content for you. And so if you're like, I'm kind of shaky on something, crack that textbook back open, get back into it. Learning happens in layers, and you can get this, okay? Let's take a look at our rubrics today. They haven't changed from last week, but let's just start really internalizing this rubric. Your A category is the thesis. You have to respond to the prompt with a historically defensible thesis or claim that establishes a line of reasoning. That establishes the line of reasoning. That's what Katie always describes as, we need that because statement in there. B is contextualization. Describe this broader historical context relevant to the prompt, just kind of like we started today. We contextualize for you, how did we get into the scientific revolution with that one slide? That's what contextualization is supposed to do, especially for a reader. If you're the writer, you bring the reader into the context and then make your claim.
Okay, for evidence, there are so many points available to you in this rubric for 2020 for evidence. So just want to remind you that 3 out of the 5 points that you can possibly get for evidence come from using the documents in a sophisticated way to support your argument. You can see here, we have the low point where you're just doing 2 documents on the topic of the prompt. And of course, we want to move further, and we want to have the same 2 documents, but rather supporting your argument here. And that would give you 2 points for evidence. And then there's this 3rd point for evidence, supporting an argument with 4 documents. So for those 4 documents that we're hoping that you'll use, you want to make sure that you are showing how those documents support the argument that you're making in the DBQ. Beyond the 3 points that are from the documents, I want to remind you that there are 2 additional points for evidence beyond the documents. So you get 1 point for using at least 1 additional piece of evidence, of historical evidence beyond that's found in the documents that's relevant to an argument about the prompt. And this year only, there is a 2nd point for doing that twice in this essay that you're going to write. So 5 total points here that you can get from using evidence in the essay.
Great, thanks, Katie. I realize this is a little bit squashed because it's kind of long and I wanted to fit on this slide, but the D category is analysis and reasoning. So you're going to earn 1 point if for 1 document you source it. Okay, that is to explain how or why the document's point of view, purpose, historical situation, or audience is relevant to an argument. Remember, that's what we've been using the acronym HAP, HAPPY for. HAP is H is for the historical situation, A for audience, P for purpose, P for point of view, and then we add the Y to the end because you need to tell us why that's important. So if you do that with 1 document and you source it correctly, you're going to earn 1 point. If we can source 2 documents correctly and tell us why that's important, you'll earn an additional point. Okay, and then in the D category at the bottom there, I guess, which we'd normally call D2, but now it's D3 because we have 3 points in the D category. That's the complexity point. So Can you demonstrate a complex understanding of the historical development that is the focus of the prompt using evidence to corroborate, qualify, or modify an argument that addresses the question? And then they have these bullet points to the right. We're going to talk through a structure that's going to help you make a decision if you want to work toward that complexity point in the writing of your DBQ. All right, so should we begin here with the prompt? This is going to be the prompt for you, the DBQ you're writing this weekend. This is also the DBQ that was on last year's exam. So evaluate whether or not the Catholic Church in the 1600s was opposed to new ideas in science. So we have the word evaluate in bold. That means you are going to look at the evidence and then you are going to take a position. Okay, really important. You look at the evidence and then you take a position, because the way the prompt's written, it's either they did support the Catholic Church did support science or was opposed to science. We're going to give you evidence and you're going to have to figure out which side of this evidence do I want to sit on and then take that position. Okay, next slide. I'll go through 1, 3, 5. Does that sound okay?
Sure.
Katie?
Yeah.
Okay. So document 1, we're just going to look at the source. I'm not going to read the document to you. This is from Paolo Antonio Foscarini. He's a Catholic monk and scientist. So that's really interesting. Catholic monk and scientist. So that will give you something to start with. The source line first, read the source line first, read the source line first. Help us think. What am I going to think? What would a Catholic monk and scientist say about new science at this time? Okay, document 2 next.
Okay, and here we have the source is a cardinal, and that is something to really think about. And I want you to also see that this letter is in response to the first document. So that's something that you can be thinking about as you're using this evidence to support whichever side you're going to be arguing. So we have a cardinal in the Catholic Church and a response to document 1.
Document 3 is from Christoph Greinberger, German Jesuit. What do I know about Jesuits? I'm thinking about that. And a mathematics professor in Rome, 1615. So thinking, what do I know about Jesuits? And the fact that this person is a mathematics professor. That may help me think about this source before I start reading this source. Next slide, please.
And here we have the visual, and want to remind you that there will be a visual in the DBQ, or there will be a non-text, there'll be a visual of some kind. This is an illustration, and this is an illustration from a text on sunspots. Another German Jesuit, again, so be thinking about what it means that this is a Jesuit, and he's an astronomer. And so you can see that, look at the picture, we have a scientific experiment going on, and think about how you want to use that image to further your argument.
Great, thanks, Katie. And then document 5, our final document, a critique of French thinker René Descartes by the Jesuits at Claremont College, Paris. So Katie did a great job at giving you the description about Descartes. You've probably studied Descartes before. What do I know about the French thinker Descartes and his positions? And then, but this is a critique written about him by Jesuits. So keep that in mind as you're going forward.
All right, so I'm gonna, before I start this, some structure here, I'm gonna reference you back to last Friday's video that was on New Monarchy, because I think that Todd did a really nice handwritten job of this, that you are certainly welcome to I think it's right at about 34 minutes. But I'm gonna try to go through what he talked about last Friday pretty quickly. And we start off with the first paragraph, that I want you to do what you've been doing for practice. I want you to begin with contextualization, 2 to 3 fact-based sentences of background relevant to what the prompt is about. And I want you to then narrow down to a claim that has a line of reasoning and lists the reasons, right? So I want you to be very clear about that. And from here, we end up with that same little triangle, and make sure that in that thesis, you include what you're going to talk about in your first 2 body paragraphs. And I want to remind you that this is just a suggestion. We had a lot of emails that asked us for thoughts about structure, that asked us about using the documents. So we just wanted to give you one possible structure that you can use. This is certainly not the only way to do it. In that first paragraph, you have your first reason. I want to remind you to please start with a topic sentence here. You're going to use 1 or 2 documents. You're going to explain them and how they support your topic sentence, which is your argument, right? So these documents in this first paragraph are supporting an argument. Here, we're going to include 1 to 2 HAPs, the sourcing, and don't forget the why part, the why it's important. And then this is also an opportunity where you can bring in 1 to 2 pieces of evidence beyond the documents. So thinking about that rubric that we just went over and where the points are coming from, you want to make sure as you're writing that you get the points in. It doesn't matter which paragraph you put some of these in, but you want to try to maximize your points to get as many points as possible. And then you're going to follow that with a second paragraph. And that second paragraph is going to have the same thing, topic sentence, 1 to 2 documents, 1 to 2 HAPs. Maybe if you only did 1 in the first paragraph, you want to think about really doing that second one. I always tell my students to do more than what's required. And then again, if you have additional pieces of evidence, you can absolutely put them here. And then Todd was saying, and this is really your moment here to think about, where are we at time-wise? Do you have enough time in this 45-minute essay to have a third body paragraph? If you feel like you don't, then I think you end the way that you started. You end with a restatement of your thesis. I really try to tell my students that they need to try to do a thesis that's perhaps even better than what they put in the introduction. Todd and I see a lot of essays that get the thesis point in the conclusion, which if you go back, if you want to rewind back to that rubric, the rubric scoring notes say that it's perfectly acceptable to be in the conclusion. And then a nice best practice is to add some additional context here. What comes next? Now that's if you're really running short on time. If you have the time, I want you to think about doing what we talked about last Friday, and that is one possible route to getting the complexity point here by having another body paragraph before that restatement. And that would be one more paragraph that acknowledges the other side or the counter argument. So for this particular document-based question, it's asking you whether or not they approved. And so you're going to take a side, and now you're going to see that there are documents you can use for the other side. So you would have a paragraph that is a nod to that counter argument. Here could be 1 document or maybe 1 or 2, and same thing. You can source and add evidence beyond the documents if you can, but of course you need to be mindful of the time and having enough time to submit your essay or to upload the picture of your essay if you choose to handwrite it. So this is just one possible structure that you could use as you go through doing your homework for this weekend.
Okay, great. Thank you, Katie. So can we go back just one slide real quick?
Yeah.
Okay. So one thing about complexity, and I really love how she did this, it built it in there so nicely. But one thing about complexity, because we've had people ask us about this last week, they said, well, can't I put my attempt at complexity kind of in that last paragraph where after I restate the thesis as a kind of a conclusion? And my only hesitation with that, and this is what I tell my own students, is that the rubric says that for complexity, this understanding must be part of the argument, not merely a phrase or reference. And
Right.
so for me, the argument means it's in the body of the essay, not in the conclusion. That's my position on that thinking. So if you're watching us first time this week and you hadn't heard that before, I just wanted to clarify that. Okay,
No,
thank you, Kate.
great. Yep.
So here is your homework. You are going to write a modified 5-document DBQ essay response. You don't necessarily worry about the timing right now, but we can focus on applying that structure and the quality of the writing. But maybe, put your phone out there and let's start timing. How long does it take me to do this? But if you have that structure in front of you and that plan, after you've kind of gone through the documents, then it's time to kind of do that, all right? So you can download the DBQ, and we have a 1-page rubric. It's in this video. If you look at the description, and you might have to click show more, and then you'll see there's a link there to this DBQ. There's a link to the rubric. And if you have the ability to print it, I suggest you print it. I always talk to my students about we read things with a pen or pencil in hand, and we mark them up. We annotate, we talk to that text. Okay. So if you have the ability to do that, do that. If you don't, then we're going to put it up on our screen and we're going to be starting to think about how I can do this DBQ using that structure that Katie just unpacked for us. We encourage you to use that structure. You can certainly, if your teacher has a way that they prefer, then you should definitely use that. Submit your responses to the following email, apurovirtuallearning@gmail.com. Please include your first name, school, state, or country. We're going to give you some samples to look at on Monday with our feedback on that.
All right. Okay, so I have some shout outs today to a group of amazing educators that have incredible students. The first one I want to shout out to is Baton Rouge Magnet School in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. They're the Bulldogs. Go Bulldogs. And then we have Westbrook High School in Beaumont, Texas. Go Bruins. And Chelsea High School in Chelsea, Alabama, which is the home of the Hornets. So these are 3 amazing educators whose students have all been emailing us with great examples. So I just wanted to give a shout out to their students because I know that they miss you guys so much, and they cannot speak highly enough of you. So shout out for our day is for these 3 schools.
Just a note from College Board, we know that not all students have access to the internet or a device. We're working on solutions to help students get what they need to show their best work. If you need mobile tools or connectivity or know someone who does, reach out directly to College Board at cb.org/tech.
All right, well, we want everyone to have a great weekend. Hopefully you are excited about trying this DBQ and trying to do it under so maybe starting to think about the time. We're only a few weeks away now. We're going to have several more attempts for you to practice, both on Fridays and then during the last week. So we're really excited, but do your best, and we will give you some feedback on that essay on Monday.
That's great. Katie, look what I got going on here.
What do you have going on?
It's
Todd?
the DBQ dance right now. The DBQ dance. You guys got this.
Being recorded, right?
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Oh, look at this. Okay, take care. You weren't kidding.